Boom, boom, boom. Open up. It's the Sixers Talk podcast knocking at your door. So glad you could join us here. Danny Pommells, along with Noah Levick, our producer, Ben Berry, in the cut, making things happen. And another preseason game in the books as we inch and crawl and climb closer to opening night. You continue to see the promos probably, and it is so good to have Sixers on opening night against the Boston Celtics. And man, if this preseason is any indication, Tyrese Maxey should be a treat to watch against that Celtics team and Malcolm Brogdon, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum and company. Not a 20-point night in the first half, but just more of that crisp, sharp shooting. Just I don't know what his warm-up routine is, if it's changed or if it's the same, but he just comes out ready to play. And I continue to say, maybe I didn't mention it on the podcast last time, but he has the best jumper on the team to me, Noah. I'm just going to continue to live and die by that because the way his body squares to the basket and the follow through, and you just expect it to go in more often than not. How excited were you by the way he continued to show, improve, and come out and perform right from the giddy-up?
It was funny because he started 4 for 5, and the one miss was 3/4 of the way down and out. So he finally cooled off from this impossibly hot start a little bit in the second quarter, but it is really incredible how he shot the ball this preseason and how aggressive he's been. And I think it's also really notable how often he's been able to play in transition. And DeAnthony Melton's presence yet again was conducive to that, just like we saw in the preseason opener in Brooklyn. Those guys sharing the floor, and the Sixers going with an ultra-small starting lineup with P.J. Tucker at center and 3 guards. And Maxey yet again was the star. The best jumper on the team kind of debate conversation is interesting. I'd put George Niang up there again. Obviously, he is not nearly as good at getting it off, and he is much more of a strictly catch and shoot guy, but it's a pure shot. And when he's open, I have a similar level of confidence that it's probably going to go in. But Tyrese Maxey is sure up there as well. I think just ability to hit extraordinarily difficult shots. James Harden still needs to be knocked off the top. Thinking about the 28-foot step-back threes, who on the team do you want taking that? I think it's still likely James Harden.
Yeah.
And, hey, Joel Embiid probably shouldn't be excluded here as well, which is remarkable, of course, for a 7-footer. But Tyrese Maxey absolutely, preseason-wise, is shooting the ball better than anyone in the NBA, which is, yet again, very cool to see. And the Sixers will just hope he can keep it up when the games count here.
And no doubt another game where we saw the starters for the opposing team play extended minutes when the Sixers didn't have their full complement. There's been no preseason game where they've had the head coach and all the starters intermingled together. Doc Rivers returning to the bench for that brief illness he had, and no Joel Embiid in this one, a schedule off day. Before we go on, can you shed some light on exactly what this workout thing? I mean, do they just not want them playing road preseason games and just using this workout thing as the buffer to that?
It was similar last preseason where they want him to be good on opening night. And it's just funny thinking back to last year how 2 minutes into the first game, he bangs knees with Jonas Valanciunas. And it's a reminder that you can only control so much and that caution sometimes is not sufficient. But yeah, I think if you want to be extraordinarily careful with anyone on the team, it's Joel Embiid. He does seem to be moving well, be in good shape, be participating in long, high-intensity practices. So I don't think there's any concern with Embiid right now. Doc Rivers did mention that for this preseason finale coming up on Wednesday against the Hornets, he's not planning to sit out all the starters. He does want those guys playing. He just thinks when you approach a game like this doesn't really matter and we're just counting the days until the regular season starts, that your team doesn't play with much focus or effort. He said he's learned that over the years. So I do think we should see some of the regulars in action for that one as well. Montrezl Harrell was also out with a rib injury that the Sixers seem to consider minor. And yeah, one of the real big things last night was that meant PJ Tucker at center for the first time as a Sixer, and that went extraordinarily well. Sixers jumped out to a 21-8 lead, and we were reminded that PJ Tucker, though 6'5", is pretty darn good at playing center. And you just saw immediately how it opens things up for his teammates, having Jared Allen, who's a strong rim protector, not in his comfort zone. He's switched on to Tobias Harris on the perimeter, or he's having to stay with Tucker in the corner because we all know that PJ Tucker can nail those corner threes if left open. And I think you see that Tucker at center is a very viable option for the Sixers. I know I'd almost felt a little sheepish bringing it up once or twice because we hadn't seen it, but now we have it in reality, and it went really strongly, I think, for the Sixers, the first PJ Tucker at the 5 experience.
Yeah, definitely a guy shooting over 40% from three, and those corner threes are his kitchen. And we saw him drill one here in this game. We also saw a little bit more of Paul Reed and what his role might be this season, particularly with Montrezl Harrell out, as you mentioned. And Reed, I think I can see him thinking the game when he's out there and kind of put restrictor plates on himself to not be too ambitious or outgoing with the basketball in certain situations because, he can put it on the floor and get to the basket and obviously thinks of himself confidently, partly because of the work that he puts in. But, it's particularly trying to fit in with the team. You got to play a role. You have to be dynamic in that role. And I think we saw some of that dynamic versatility last night against Cleveland. Would you agree?
Yeah, the point you made to me is honestly one of the more fascinating storylines of this preseason. Just the Sixers encouraging Reed to play this smoother, simpler style where he's going to be more predictable to his teammates. Because I think at lower levels we've seen he has this quirky, awkward, unpredictable game that sometimes makes him hard to guard. He's doing these weird Euro steps and scoring sometimes as a result, but this isn't the G League anymore, and the Sixers want him helping their offense to run fluidly. And I agree with you. You can see he's thinking out there, which isn't ideal, but also good for him that he's trying to embrace the way the team wants him to play. And it's funny, a couple days ago, just asking him about practicing against Montrezl Harrell, and he said, it's like playing against myself. Where it's this ultra high energy, competitive guy. Even told a story of Harrell elbowing him on the lip after a spin move, and that just showing him, oh, this guy's got some game, and like he's going to bring it every single day in practice. So there's that angle of it with Harrell and Reed, where of course they're just pushing each other to play really hard all the time. But then also the Sixers and Doc Rivers are fans of Montrezl Harrell's little tools offensively with the dribble handoffs and making solid reads out of the short roll and setting good screens for his teammates. And they hope that Paul Reed can emulate some of that and learn from it. So I think that's really interesting, just the relationship and dynamic with these guys where there's a competition. But also, Harrell's been doing this a while, and he happens to be skilled in areas where the Sixers want Paul Reed to learn, and Paul Reed's eager to take that in and try to find the right offensive balance both for himself and the Sixers as a team.
Yeah, the toughness level definitely. Paul Reed couldn't do it on his own, but it's nice to have Paul Reed in-house and then to have guys like Tucker and Harrell come in to kind of demonstrate what NBA toughness looks like in different ways on their own. But yeah, like what we thought possibly maybe Danny Green might have brought to Matisse Thybulle, maybe Harrell last season, maybe Harrell and Tucker could bring that, for Paul Reed.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilMU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
I want to ask you about James Harden and talk about James a bit. seeing Darius Garland and the tough shot making and the footwork and the hezzy moves and whatnot, and seeing Tyrese Maxey with the speed and style of play that he has, you add the Anthony Melton to that, and some other guards that were out on the floor. Just a little bit of a difference in what they do and what James Harden does. And I want to just label it strictly as age, but it's definitely a style of play. But just seeing the speed and tempo that they play with, and it's basketball is all about change of pace and things like that. So it's not necessarily an indictment on James that he's not at that same tempo as those younger guys, but it just, when he has the ball, is a little bit of a different rhythm. And in the past, when he would have his dribble moves and he was in his prime more with the Rockets, the ball would slow down, but it was a different tempo. I just don't feel like he quite captures the same tempo from then. And it's interesting to see him out there, because when he's missing shots, you don't quite get that same impact that he brings out there. And I see him so sharp with the passes and setting guys up, but the team isn't going to be what they should be if he's not making shots and being dynamic. I use that word a lot, but I really like it because it means just you bring more than one thing. And that one thing being passing will be great, but he's got to bring the shot making and the playmaking as well, right, Noah?
I think so. I think a lot of it's just going to boil down to the tough shot making in fourth quarters, especially when teams are especially determined that Joel Embiid is not going to beat them. So You won't get any good answers to that specific question anytime soon, but it's very much a valid area to watch and perhaps have some concerns with, because Harden is 33 years old, and we still need to see whether his optimism about this ability to have a healthy offseason will yield, strong on-court results when the games really matter, when it's crunch time, when the Sixers need him to create an inch or two of space to get off that jumper, as opposed to just totally being swarmed by the defense and not being capable or coming up short, as he often did in the fourth quarter of the Miami series last year. But I thought overall the Sixers did some nice things with their small ball lineup offensively, and I was impressed with the Anthony Melton's passing. I think a lot of it's not Harden level where you can see it's so brilliant and it's a pass that no one else can make. But pretty consistently, if the ball is swung to him late in the shot clock, you can see that you've got a decent chance of scoring. He's going to make a smart, quick decision. He even had a nice pass from the high post to Tucker in the corner. I thought he had a nice drive baseline where he kicked it to Tobias Harris in the opposite corner. And Shake Milton mentioned this a couple of days ago, that it is great playing with the guy who can dribble, pass, and shoot. And DeAnthony Melton, yes, defense is his better end, but he checks all of those boxes. And the Sixers haven't had many players like that. And I think when you're playing small ball and your style is obviously different and less deliberate than when Embiid's on the floor, that's great to have someone who loves playing in transition, who can do it well, who can drive and kick. And then also in the half court, I think maybe is a little underrated skill-wise as a passer. I thought he was strong in that area last night, and it helped the Sixers generate some better possessions. And that's, I think, really good stuff heading into the regular season.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, with the Sixers playing opening night, yes, it is preseason, but things will ramp up quickly here as they travel to Boston and then have a game at Milwaukee, both nationally televised games to start the season. So while this is the preseason, you're figuring things out, you're seeing what guys have. The rotation is obviously a lot different than last season, but they're going to have to ramp up things and be as close to what they want to be here pretty soon. And hopefully, like Noah mentioned, that playing the starters more minutes in this last preseason game will precipitate some of that. Tobias Harris, I just want to mention his name because he's been steady and been, out there on the floor trying to contribute and let it fly, like he mentioned, wherever the opportunity presents it. And he's been the Tobias Harris that we've expected, I think. And it's interesting to see, Matisse Thybulle on the floor, trying to emulate some of that 3-and-D, stuff that so many people have asked him to contribute. Thoughts on those two guys as, Thybulle kind of showing that he's able to mentally absorb the role that people wanted him to play. And, Doc Rivers saying, that the work he's put in and the time that he's put in the gym is all that they can ask for from him.
Right. I think the confidence issues that he's clearly had in the past are understandable because you're making a hair over 30% of your three-point shots. Not many players would be confident in that position. But, yeah, Rivers is stressing to him, just don't think about it. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't lose faith. And to Thybulle's credit, he's held that up. Airballed his first one last night, made a shot near the end of the first half. And then against a little bit lesser competition, he did knock 2 down in the fourth quarter. So maybe that gets him trending in a slightly more positive direction. I don't think it's an extremely big deal, but it's obviously better than him skipping to 1 for 10 or 1 for 11 from 3 for the preseason. Because as much as you want to preach, unconditional confidence, I think that's hard to actually enact for many players when shots just are not going in. And unlike the last time out, he did get first quarter minutes. The Sixers had him as the first sub for Maxey, and he was guarding Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. And perhaps that early in the season is a look at how he might be used in some situations. Maybe he's not a guy who's getting 25 minutes every single night, but in specific matchups or against specific teams, the Sixers give him a chance to make an early defensive impact. And then if he does that, he gets a more extended run. So obviously that'll be intriguing to track, but that wouldn't shock me if that's how
that's a short leash, baby. That is a short leash. I mean, and a far cry from, him starting games, in the past for this team. So
yeah, you just see that Daniel House Jr. is really solid and
oozing confidence to me.
Yeah, he knows himself. And speaking of confidence as a shooter, I asked about just how his offensive approach has changed over the years, and he said, "Look, if the ball's swung to me and I'm 1 for 10 for the night, it is in my head now that that's going to be a tough shot." And then he paused and said, "I'm still going to shoot it." So innately, he believes in himself, and he's all about doing what's best for the team and understanding that he is not a star, and it's all about just playing his role and figuring out what's successful in a specific environment. But this is someone who has a deep core belief in himself, and that's not bad to have in a role player. I think there's a nice mix of self-awareness and self-confidence in House, and he's going to be fun to watch, I think, in some of these games.
Fun to watch. I think he'll give us some fun sound bites too. It'll be fun to get to know him as the season goes on, and it's not, don't sweep it under the rug. He's playing with guys he's played with before, guys he's familiar with Harden and Harrell, and guys that he has experience being on the floor with. And to be some sort of an NBA journeyman, you got to kind of bring your game, right? You got to be able to go out there and perform. And I feel like he is prepared and seems very much like what you would want out of an NBA veteran, coming in and executing and being, confident in their role. Roles have changed for Furkan, Korkmaz, Isaiah Joe. They are further down the bench. But you maintain that Isaiah Joe you think he's going to make the team just as a, guy that's toward the end of the bench, and Furkan Korkmaz's role will be, probably similar to Matisse Thybulle, where he'll get minutes depending on the matchup to produce and contribute in the way that, he's expected to, shooting the basketball. And if he does well with that, he'll get more minutes. If not, then he'll probably won't. Would you assume the same thing?
Well, with Korkmaz, I think you have to figure there's a decent chance he's justifiably below Thybulle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bar might be a little higher in terms of excelling at his best skill. So with Thybulle, if he is a good version of himself defensively and not shooting the ball poorly, I can imagine that often meriting minutes, whereas with Korkmaz, feels like it's hard to say that playing him is the right decision unless he's just white hot from three-point range, because that presumably means less minutes for House and less minutes for these players that you have a lot of trust in as two-way cornerstones for your team, I think. But Isaiah Joe, yeah, he at least played in this game, unlike the last one. And if you were still paying attention in the dying minutes, knocked down a step-back three, and the shot looked good, as it often does in the preseason for him. Charles Bassey did not play, and if the Sixers don't make a trade and this is just a Bassey or Joe situation, it looks like it is going to be Isaiah Joe who is on the Sixers opening night roster. Really tough for Charles Bassey if he doesn't make this team. Of course, there's a bunch that goes on behind the scenes that we're not privy to as far as how these fringe guys are practicing and what they're showing the coaching staff in that regard. But man, Charles Bassey, as I've said before, I think has clear NBA center potential, and it might not end up happening in Philadelphia. He might not get a chance to see it through here. So I'm really curious to see what happens with him, and if there's another organization that might like him and give him a chance, whether that's as a two-way guy in the G League, in the NBA, et cetera. So we'll see with Bassey, but it does look like Joe is going to be on this team as things sit right now.
There was some thought that when Harden came over, that Bassey was a prime candidate for that action that we saw with him and Clint Capella, with the screen and the hard roll and the lob. Maybe we see that with Harrell. We haven't seen that with Embiid, and he's definitely not we don't want to put that type of strain on Joel to have to go up and down like that on that type of play, because he's obviously more versatile and you can do more things with the pick and pop or whatever. But is it strange to you that they haven't tried that with Harden and some other player on the team, particularly because it seemed to be something that James was so good at in the past?
I hear what you're saying, but I think it's clear the other centers on this team have had borderline excellent training camps and preseasons. I would put Paul Reed at least in that category, and you can only keep so many centers on your team, or it's only smart to keep so many centers on your team. And we did get a little insight from Doc Rivers kind of indirectly on Bassey. I believe this was Sunday, where he said this was one of his best practices in a while. He was blocking shots and being active. And he kind of said with a chuckle, like, we need him to do that a lot more. So I think the consistency, at least in the Sixers coaching staff's mind, has been lacking with Bassey in these practices. But it's a tough spot for any young player where your opportunities, both in practices and games, are sparse. And the guys you're competing against are not really giving the team any reasons to dislike them. Like, I think Paul Reed's been so good, and the team loves Montrezl Harrell, obviously, and Doc Rivers has the relationship with Harrell. PJ Tucker, oh, by the way, is also a center who can play quite well at that position. So Charles Bassey, I think, was always in a difficult situation here, and it might not end up panning out for him in Philadelphia. As we said, picks in the 50s, they don't tend to stick very long with the team that drafted them. Paul Reed is very much exceptional in that way.
Particularly undrafted guys as well. You see success stories like, guys like Fred VanVleet and things like that, but, opportunities of that are few and far between. I bring that up because Trevelin Queen, we hardly knew ye. He has been shipped off. I think is the roster at 18 players now.
It's very fluid because we're
Okay.
at this time where they're doing a lot of signing and then waiving guys for the purpose of ensuring they become Delaware Bluecoats.
Is that the Mac McClung thing? Is that what that
Yeah,
is?
so Mac McClung signed in Exhibit 10, was waived, and that means that the team expects him to be a Bluecoat. For those who have not heard of him, a good name to type into YouTube. A high-flying 6'2" guard. Broke Allen Iverson's Virginia high school scoring record, which I was not aware of, and was the G League Rookie of the Year last year with the South Bay Lakers. So he will be a source of entertainment, I think, in Delaware this season. But yeah, as far as the end of the roster, as we previewed before, it looked like it was going to be Queen, Bassey, or Joe, which of those three, and now it looks like it's Bassey or Joe, and as we said, there's a lot of indications that Isaiah Joe will get that spot. So that is how it sits now, but there's a bunch happening, and we will have clarity by 5 p.m. on the 17th.
How thin is that margin, do you think, between end of the bench, G League, Europe or overseas player? You know what I'm saying? How thin do you think that margin is between Isaiah Joe, Mac McClung, or another guy who's like overseas getting buckets? Like, do you feel like it's really just a subjective thing about fit and style and particular team, or do you think it's a wide margin there?
That's a great question. I've thought about it before. I don't have any great answers. I do think a lot of it is team preference and situation and luck.
It's crazy, man.
The formula one example,
a success story. It's crazy.
Yeah, one example I think of is Braxton Key, who was a Bluecoat, a Sixer, and Charlie Brown Jr. kind of got that two-way spot that perhaps he might have had a chance at. But then you see later in the year, he's getting real minutes and a bit of an audition with the Detroit Pistons because
Christian Wood
Come on. Made the most of the potential.
Right, that's like the exception to the rule. Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. But
yeah,
ends of the spectrum, different ends of the spectrum, but crazy. Yeah.
So I think some of it is very random and luck-based and subjective. I do think from what I've gathered, attitude and role acceptance is a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. I think we've used the example of Paul Reed, 20 points per game for him in the G League, not difficult, but understanding what's different and what should be more limited about his approach in the NBA, that is hard for some NBA G League type of players to understand and accept and actually do well. George Niang's another decent example of that, someone who could rather easily be super versatile at Iowa State and in the G League and could handle the rock and drive, from the perimeter. In the NBA, nope, that is not on the table. You are catch and shoot and do all the little role player things to complement that one standout skill that you have. So it is hard for these guys to make it, but the ones that do, I think, tend to have a relatively elite area, or at least an NBA skill, right, and then have a feel for the attitude they need to have in order to actually crack a team. And you never know what's going to be the deciding factor. It might be one practice, Doc Rivers likes how you took a charge or likes your energy. Right. And should it be more objective? Ideally, yes, but that's just the reality. And you have control over your attitude. If your attitude's good, you give yourself a better chance, I think, is how it often plays out.
We could talk about this, forever. But I just listening to you talk, I just think different things came to mind when you were saying skill set. I mean, you got a guy like Robert Covington, who's a great example of coming, through the ranks and then to NBA success and long-term contracts and big money and things like that. Not necessarily with a team who, brought him up, but what he showcased here in Philly led to money elsewhere. And I think it was Portland that ended up paying him, but then you said you have to bring an NBA style skill set or some type of thing, and you got the dude Alvarez in New Orleans where energy and shot making, his defensive prowess and things like that, but he the camping out by the bench thing just became so like every game you're like watching for it on the highlights to see if he pulled it off again and who he got. Then he finally gets Chris Paul and he's like getting the crowd energized. So there's just something to say for the intangibles, and like it's just like a weird mixture that the formula to success, it can be so different from person to person. But I think you hit the nail on the head.
Absolutely. Yeah, just one final thought on this that came to mind as we were talking. I think there will be more opportunities this year for the processy, fringe, are they an NBA player really kind of guys, because I imagine there will be a lot of motivation to not have the best record and to give yourself a chance to draft Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson, who are seemingly generational prospects. So last year, maybe the Thunder were the best candidate for those sort of guys. I think there will be a few teams this year where, as the season develops and the playoffs are not realistic, you will see the Braxton Keys and Charlie Brown Jr.'s of the world getting plenty of minutes, and those teams will be thinking ahead to the NBA draft and the lottery and hoping for the best.
Sixers fans, be prepared for some of those moments when you look at the other team's rosters. Some of these teams, like, who was that? What guy? Oh, I remember him from college. So I didn't know he was still around. So Noah, excellent point, because Richard Jefferson with the quote I read the other day that if LeBron James was in the same draft as Victor Wembanyama, he would be the second pick, according to Richard Jefferson. So yeah, a lot of bullish people on what this kid can bring. Check him out if you haven't. And be sure to check out Noah Levick's observations on the Sixers preseason game and the rest of his work on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. Articles galore and thoughts and perspectives that you're not going to get anywhere else. Noah, anything else we missed or didn't get to?
I think we covered everything big. One more to go. Wednesday against Charlotte. And then Sixers Celtics at TD Garden. Let's get ready. Yeah.
What a time to be a Philadelphia sports fan. The Sixers getting started. The Phillies, of course. As we record this, they play in the NLDS today at 1:00. The Eagles are 5-0. The Union, the top seed in the Eastern Conference. A lot of home games, hopefully coming up for them here in this playoff run. So get out and support your favorite teams, and maybe get to know some teams that you haven't had a chance to check out. But we will be there with you every step of the way for this Sixers season. The intrigue, and the frivolity is growing as we speak. So check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. For Noah, and I'm Danny and Ben Barry. We will see you next time on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works.